I'm here with Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran. Alexander, let's do a follow-up to a live stream that we did on Brexit and the court rulings. When we did the live stream, we were talking about two court rulings in the UK. One was the Scottish court and one was the English higher court. Correct me if I'm wrong on any of these matters. And we now have some clarity as to what's happening. So give us the breakdown, Alexander, as to what these courts are ruling.
Yes. Now, can I just say we're doing this, making this video on the 18th of September. So it's very unlikely, but just possible that things might start to happen before we're able to publish this video. But this should give people an idea. This is where we are at the moment. This is the 18th of Wednesday, the 18th of September. The proceedings in the UK Supreme Court, which covers both England and Scotland and Northern Ireland, began on Tuesday, the 17th. We've had 2 days of very sophisticated legal argument. The lawyers on each side are some of the best constitutional lawyers in Britain. One is Lord Panic. Actually, I know that sounds a bit bizarre, but his name is spelled Panick, and he's a very brilliant lawyer. He is representing Gina Miller, who is the Remain campaigner, who's trying to argue that the prorogation of Parliament was illegal. And on the government side, we have two very, very brilliant and outstanding constitutional lawyers. Lord Keynes, who is the Advocate General of Scotland, and Mr. Eady, who is a brilliant barrister who often represents the government in constitutional law cases. He, by the way, just for some of our viewers to know, represented the government in the Robin Hillbrook case that we've been hearing so much about, which he, of course, won. So these are very able lawyers, I should say, just to give people an idea of how specialist this area of constitutional law is. They all apparently come from the same chambers, which is Blackstone Chambers, which is one of the top law chambers in London. And the reason that is because this is such a rarefied and unusual area of the law, that the number of people with the caliber to do it is very small, and they tend all to be concentrated in one chambers. It is very common in England, when you have a really difficult area of the law, for people on each side to come from the same set of chambers. It's not a conflict of interest, and nobody should think anything of it. Now, I've been following the proceedings in the Supreme Court very carefully. We have 11 justices hearing the case. We don't yet know when the decision is going to be made, and it seems that there may still be some legal argument tomorrow. It's likely that the Supreme Court, after they've heard the argument, will go away, and that they will spend some time trying to come to an agreement between themselves, all 11 of them, and there will then be a series of written judgments by various groups of judges, and of course the majority will, as in the US Supreme Court, be the judgment that is followed. So there might be dissenting minority judgments, but there will be one single judgment, which will be that of the majority, which will be accepted. Now, there could be deadlock. I mean, there's 11 justices. They might decide on different things. It's not impossible, but I think it's unlikely. Now, where do we stand in the legal arguments, and how is the case going? I'm going to make one very quick observation. I've been following very closely some of the media commentary, and I think one thing I really do need to explain about these sort of proceedings, which the commentary does not convey properly, is that what barristers, top barristers like Panick, Keynes and Eady actually say is not so important in some respects, because the most important submissions are made in writing. Each of these lawyers will have prepared a very carefully crafted legal submission. In England, it's traditionally called a skeleton argument. Sounds odd, but that's the name of it, which sets out all the legal points that they want to make. And there will also be provided to the judges what's called an authorities bundle with all the case law that they want to refer to, all the citations indexed and listed and copied for the judges to read. And those are the most important things that come before the court. What people say tends to matter much less. And the fact that the judges are asking questions of the barristers is, in fact, more often than not, a clearer indication of the way a case is going than what the barristers themselves say. So the fact that yesterday, for example, Lord Panic, who represents the Remainers, was rather left alone to say what he wanted to say, whereas Lord Keynes, who represents the government, was very closely questioned by some of the judges, is not a sign that the court prefers Lord Panic to Lord Keynes. It merely means that they are more interested in some of Lord Keynes' arguments than they are in Lord Panic's arguments. So we have to look at what is being discussed and what is being talked about. And there are two basic issues. One issue is whether the prorogation of Parliament, whether Parliament was prorogued for a valid purpose. And Lord Keynes said on behalf of the government that it's perfectly appropriate for the government for political reasons, that it's been done before, and he cited a number of examples from the past when it has happened. And there's nothing unusual in this prorogation, different days depending on how you count them, but certainly not for the 5 weeks that the Panic on behalf of the Remainers was alleging, because it's actually a period of time taken up by party conferences, and it doesn't in fact result in the great loss of Parliament that some people have been alleging. So there was that argument, and that was made on Tuesday. Another argument which was made on Tuesday, which is extremely important, but which again the media has not, I think, understood properly, is that Lord Keynes, who is the Scotland, was pointing out that the law in Scotland and the law in England on the question of proroguing Parliament is the same. I say that because I know that some people have been arguing, and in fact they've been arguing in comments which have been sent to us, that the legal systems in Scotland and England are different, and the law on these issues is also different. That I am sure also is not the case on questions of proroguing Parliament. The legal principles applied both in Scotland and in England are identical, and if the court decides, the Supreme Court decides, that the High Court in England was right, and the government does have the right to prorogue Parliament, then the decision of the Scottish court was wrong. And that is an important point to make, because it completely extinguishes any possibility of the Supreme Court saying, well, yes, it's right, both the High Court is right, and the Scottish court is right, and then it's very difficult to decide which of the two should be followed. That is a complete misconception of the law. The Constitution, in respect to prorogation of parliaments, is the same. So that was discussed yesterday. the question of whether the prorogation was done for a proper political purpose was also discussed yesterday. Today, Wednesday, the discussion moved on to a completely different topic, which is whether or not the prorogation, the question of the prorogation, can be considered by courts at all, whether it is purely a political matter between the Prime Minister and the Queen, and whether the judges, whether the courts have any right to any opinion about it whatever. And this is the argument that Mr. Eady was making today, Mr. Eady QC. So these were the arguments. Now, I'm going to express, first of all, what I think is the correct view. I'm obviously not up to the level of these judges, but this is my own opinion. I think, as I said previously, that the High Court was right. I think that the prorogation was fully justified, irrespective of whether it was political or not. And I also think that it is not justiciable. In other words, I don't think the courts have any right to interfere in what is decided between the Prime Minister and the Queen. That is purely a matter for them, and what the Prime Minister advises the Queen to do on a political question should not be decided by the courts. The present view that I'm getting from the commentaries, the legal commentaries, the lawyers who've been following this case, and apparently this is also the view of the government's lawyers, is that what the Supreme Court is likely to decide is that the prorogation was right. In other words, that the prorogation was for a legal purpose and cannot be set aside, but that the question of prorogation is justiciable. In other words, that in future, the courts are entitled to look at whether a prorogation was decided for a lawful purpose and to rule otherwise, which, if that is what they decide to do, if that is what the Supreme Court decides to do, would be a very radical departure on the law as we know it. Anyway, that's where its head seems to be heading. It looks as if the government is going to win, but the Supreme Court may be about to give itself and the courts a power in future to consider whether what the government is doing in proroguing Parliament is proper or not, which would be, as I said, a radical advance in what the courts have traditionally done up to now. However, that's a matter for the lawyers, more interesting for the lawyers, I think, than it would be in terms of the political conflict over Brexit itself.
Okay, how long is this process going to play out, Alexander? And finally, wrap it up for us and explain the significance of this to the overall Brexit picture. I mean, is this really that significant? Is this more of a sideshow? How do you see these court cases as far as the entire Brexit saga is concerned?
Right, now let's turn to how long this process is going to take. I have no idea. I don't think anybody does. In theory, it could take weeks for the Supreme Court to make a decision. I think they will try to make a decision very fast. How fast that would be, I don't know. But my guess is that they'd like to wrap it up within days rather than weeks, because of course the prorogation itself is only going to last for 5 weeks, and already we're a week into that period. So I don't think they will want a decision after the prorogation is either over or almost over, because that would defeat the purpose of a Supreme Court judgment in a situation of this kind. However, it's for them to decide how long it's going to take. And this is a very difficult and complicated area of law. And we have 11 judges sitting and listening to this case. And as I said, it's perfectly possible that they will come away with different views. And in fact, it's quite likely that there will be quite a lot of toing and froing and discussion between them in order to try to reach a consensus. And there's no guarantee that they will, in the end, achieve a consensus. So it could take more than a couple of days, but I don't think they'll want to leave it for very long. Now, in terms of the Brexit battle, I think it very much depends on whether they decide that this prorogation was lawful or not. If they decide that the prorogation was unlawful, which I still think is extremely unlikely, but if they decide that, then Boris Johnson has said that he will recall Parliament. Now, what that means is that the Remainers, who are, to be clear, a majority in the House of Commons, will still have more weeks of time to cause as much trouble for the government as they can. Boris Johnson's advisors are apparently considering the possibility of recalling Parliament and then proroguing it all over again, which I think would be an extraordinary step to take. And again, I have to say, I don't think Boris Johnson's stomach is for doing things like that, which many people would say are blatantly blatant attempts to get round a court decision. Now, so I think if it goes against the government, we will have Parliament recalled. The big question then is what the Remainers are going to do with these extra weeks. And I don't really know what they're going to do. I mean, it's still clear, I think, that they're not prepared to overthrow the government, which they could do. They do have the numbers in the House of Commons to do, but they're not prepared to do it because they don't want to make Jeremy Corbyn Prime Minister. So I can't really see how recalling Parliament actually is going to help them. That's my own view about this, bearing in mind that Parliament is going to be recalled on the 14th of October anyway. But the optics of having the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom say that the government acted unlawfully would be hugely damaging. I think in that kind of situation, Boris Johnson's reputation as Prime Minister would be extremely badly damaged. And I think that would make him look even weaker than he looks already. That's if, as I said, the Supreme Court decides this is unlawful. If it decides that the prorogation is lawful, then I think that Boris Johnson will be strengthened as a result of this legal challenge, because there's been talk about him, carrying out a coup, about him behaving improperly, about him being some sort of a dictator. I don't think any of that would be frankly plausible or credible or carry any conviction at all if, on the contrary, he was able to say that the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom has said that he acted lawfully. And I think he would then move on in a stronger position than the one in which he is in now. So, it will have an impact on Brexit, perhaps not a decisive one, but it will leave either Johnson much weaker or Johnson much stronger. And that is not something we can discount, given the fact that Johnson is still saying that he's not going to go for an extension on the 31st of October, and he's still giving hints that he's going to defy the Ben let win law. If he's weaker as a result of a Supreme Court judgment, he will find that much more difficult. If he's stronger, he will find it easier to go against the Ben let win law. There is the constitutional issue which I appreciate is of much less interest to people who care about Brexit, but which in British constitutional and legal terms is hugely important. Because if the Supreme Court says that this issue of whether or not the Prime Minister and the Queen can prorogue Parliament is justiciable, in other words, if it can be in future challenged in the courts, then the Prime Minister's power would have been very greatly reduced, and the power of the courts would have been very greatly increased. Now, I still don't personally think that's what they're going to decide, but most commentators think they will decide that. And if we do get that kind of decision, then the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom will be behaving much more like the Supreme Court of the United States, knocking down decisions of the executive on questions that the executive has, the power to make decisions, knocking down those decisions where it deems them unconstitutional, except, of course, that the UK Supreme Court would actually have even more power than the United States Supreme Court, because the United States Supreme Court is limited by the text of the US's written constitution, whereas in Britain, we don't have a written constitution, so that the United Kingdom Supreme Court can say whatever it thinks the constitution is from one day to another, and can go on adding more and more power to itself that way. I don't think it's going to do it, but most people who follow this and who understand these things think it will. So we've got to see, and that could have enormous implications for the future.
All right. Excellent analysis. Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran. Guys, if you like this video, click on the subscribe button down below. Click on the notifications bell to make sure you get notifications every time we push out a new video. Remember, you can get an audio copy of this video. Follow us on iTunes and SoundCloud. The link for those platforms is in the description box down below. And also in the description box, you will find links to donate to the Duran, PayPal, Patreon, and Subscribe Star. Please help us out and donate to this channel. It keeps us going. And another thing that keeps us going, Alexander, is when you go to the Duran shop, theduranshop.com, and you pick up magic mugs or magic t-shirts. Or magic hats, or magic stickers.
Or magic polo shirts, like the one I'm wearing at the moment. It's a phenomenal polo shirt, as I said. Actually, can I just say, my wife has gradually come to like this one, I think, the best. I have a blue one, which I like even more, but this is my wife's favorite. So 100% cotton, incredibly comfortable, amazingly stylish, wearable in all kinds of weather, except perhaps very cold weather, with our own Duran double-headed eagle there. Alex is wearing, I think it's a long sleeve sheet t-shirt that you're wearing at the moment. Am I guessing? No, it's a short sleeve one, but you can see he's also got the same double-headed eagle, which points to east and west. They are phenomenal shirts. As I said, I've always in the past bought myself really good clothes from, Savile Row, Jermyn Street, bespoke clothes. I know what I'm talking about when I say that these clothes, these t-shirts and hats and hoodies and other great things in our shop, feedback we're getting on our clothes is phenomenal, and our competitors think so also, because some of them are copying our merchandise, but doing so, as we are learning, at much lower standards. So come to our shop, buy the right thing, buy these great mugs. Now, today I've been drinking from this other mug, which is a beautiful porcelain mug. I've got lots of our mugs, but this is the one with the double-headed eagle of Russia, of the Russian Federation. It's on Vladimir Putin's mugs and plates and all those sorts of things that he drinks from in the Kremlin. He was having one of these mugs when he went to the G20 summit quite recently and made a lot of attention there. So we have mugs, we have T-shirts, we have hoodies, we have polo shirts, we've got hats, we've got stickers. Alex has just refreshed our store with a whole lot of more great products. We have books. We have 2 books on Russiagate, and we have a book on Brexit. All of those can be bought from our shop. Help the Duran, help yourself by going to the shop and buying all this great stuff. Alex will tell you how to do it.
The link to the Duran shop is in the description box down below. Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran. Thank you very much. Until next time, take care.